New York in the 1960s was gritty, alive, and full of soul. The city pulsed with corner store radios, jazz echoing from basements, and stoops packed with laughter until sunset. It wasn't polished, but it was ours. Every block held its own rhythm, its own scent, its own story. What we lost wasn't just places, it was a feeling, and some of it we'll simply never get back. The rumble overhead was constant, metallic, and oddly comforting. Before the last elevated tracks in Manhattan were torn down, they wrapped through neighborhoods like steel veins. The screech of wheels and the sway of rail cars became part of daily life, a rhythm that tied together borough and block. Shadows from the trains danced across storefronts, barber shops, and pushcarts. Kids stopped in their tracks to watch them go by, and locals spoke louder when one thundered overhead. It wasn't just transit, it was atmosphere, a soundtrack to the working-class New York experience. The 3rd Avenue L was one of the last to vanish, taking with it an entire way of seeing the city from above, in motion, side by side with strangers. Its removal left behind silence that felt more like loss than progress. The city changed its skyline, traded steel for sunlight, but something was gone. Those elevated lines connected more than stops. They connected lives, casting a long, echoing shadow that still lingers. Walking into the original Pennsylvania station felt like entering a cathedral of steel and stone. Light poured through vaulted glass ceilings, and marble columns stretched like arms, welcoming travelers home. It was majestic, timeless, and then it was gone. In 1963, the building was demolished, piece by piece, replaced by fluorescent lights and concrete corridors. What once inspired awe became an underground maze, stripped of grace, built for efficiency, not experience. The destruction sparked something New York hadn't fully felt before. Grief for a building. Protests rose, writers mourned, architects rallied. It was the moment the city realized it could lose its soul, and from that heartbreak, the preservation movement was born. But for those who remember walking into that grand space, the memory stings. You didn't need to be wealthy to feel important there. You just had to walk through the door and believe the city had a place for you. Have you ever mourned a vanished building? On nearly every block stood a small shop that knew your name. The grocer who let you pay tomorrow, the butcher who cut meat just how your mother liked it, the candy store owner who snuck you a piece for free. These mom-and-pop stores weren't just convenient, they were personal. You didn't just shop, you caught up on neighborhood news, learned who had a new baby, who lost a job, who needed a hand. These places were gathering points, stitched into the daily fabric of life, louder than the subway but warmer than any home. They stayed open late, trusted your face, and carried exactly what locals wanted. Every shelf, every smell, every cracked tile told a story. Chain stores had no place here. This was loyalty, not branding. Slowly, rents rose, big names moved in, and those tiny stores, one by one, disappeared. The storefronts changed, but the heart they held never quite came back. There was a time you could live in the Village, the Lower East Side, or Hell's Kitchen, even if you worked retail or painted signs. Rent wasn't cheap, but it was possible, and that possibility shaped the dreams of a generation. You could share a place with friends, write poetry by the fire escape, or raise 3 kids in 4 rooms. Tenants knew each other, knocked on doors, and fixed things together. Landlords weren't faceless corporations, they lived down the hall or around the corner. These apartments weren't luxurious, paint peeled, pipes clanged, and floors creaked, but they were home. They offered roots in a city that moved fast, and the feeling that you could belong without being rich. Now, those same spaces cost more than most can earn in a year. What once made the city livable is now a memory, folded into rent-controlled corners and fading photographs. After dark, New York sang in smoke and rhythm. From Harlem to the Village, jazz clubs pulsed with horns, bass lines, and the quiet hum of crowded rooms. It wasn't a concert, it was communion, a ritual held in dimly lit basements and back rooms. Birdland, the 5 Spot, the Village Vanguard. These weren't just venues. They were laboratories of sound, where legends were born and rules were broken. You could see John Coltrane one night, then Charles Mingus the next, all for the price of 2 drinks and a seat near the stage. Inside, the world fell away. No matter who you were or what you did by day, you were welcome there if you listened. The music didn't ask for status, it asked for soul. Today, jazz still exists, but the atmosphere has changed. Those nights were raw, electric, unrepeatable. You didn't just hear the music, you felt it in your chest and carried it home through the neon-lit streets. Some of the best memories in New York didn't happen indoors. They happened on the stoop, where neighbors gathered after dinner, kids sat trading jokes, and old men argued about baseball and politics. The stoop was a front-row seat to the world, and everyone had a place on the steps. Summer brought more than heat, it brought block parties. Streets closed off, speakers rolled out, and grills smoked from one end of the block to the other. You didn't need an invitation, you just showed up, plate in hand, music in the air. These moments built more than community, they built family. People looked after each other's kids, shared fans when the apartments got too hot, and passed on recipes and advice between stoop rails. It was social glue, unspoken but unbreakable. As air conditioners moved people inside and cities changed, that outdoor life faded. The stoops remain, but the stories once told on them feel quieter now, like laughter echoing from another time. You dropped a nickel, turned a knob, and opened a little glass door. There it was. Hot pie, creamy mac and cheese, fresh sandwiches. The automat was a marvel of simplicity, a warm cafeteria powered by coins and tradition. Horn and Hard Art locations weren't just lunch stops, they were part of the city's rhythm. Office workers, cab drivers, students, and grandparents all shared tables, side by side, no menus, no fuss. It was New York without pretense, and everyone knew how it worked. The smell of coffee, the clink of change, the quiet murmur of strangers eating together, it was a different kind of luxury. People lingered with a paper and a pastry, or rushed through on their way to a shift. There was comfort in the routine, and dignity in how little it took. When the last automat closed, an era ended. Cafeterias became fast food, and the elegance of that simple machine disappeared. We didn't just lose a dining option, we lost a ritual, one that belonged to everyone. The cafes of Greenwich Village weren't glamorous, but they were electric. Smoke curled from the mouths of poets. Guitars hummed beneath protest songs. Canvases leaned against brick walls, still drying. This was New York's beating heart of rebellion, and it pulsed with creativity. You could sit next to a stranger and leave with a poem. Names like Allen Ginsberg or Bob Dylan floated through coffee houses before they ever hit records or books. Art was made on napkins, not on contracts, and it was shared because it had to be. It wasn't about fame, it was about expression. Rent was cheap, expectations were lower, and the ideas were massive. People lived in tiny walk-ups but thought in cosmic scales. The village belonged to the strange, the brave, the broke, and the brilliant. Gentrification eventually crept in. Prices rose, artists moved out, and the cafes turned into boutiques. The fire didn't vanish, but it scattered, and what remains now is mostly echo. Sidewalks were playgrounds, hydrants were sprinklers, and every kid knew which stoops had the best view. Childhood in 1960s New York was lived outdoors, in motion, and often unsupervised. Parents trusted the block to raise the kids, and most of the time, it did. Chalk drawings stained the pavement, jump ropes slapped the concrete, radios blared doo-wop or Motown from windows above. The city was loud, but it was alive, and children made it even louder. They learned street rules before school rules, and toughness came with the territory. There were scraped knees, stolen snacks, first crushes, and real friendships made before dinner. It wasn't perfect, it was dirty, messy, and unpredictable, but it was freedom. You learned your world one corner at a time, with a pack of friends and a pocket full of nothing. Today, streets feel quieter, kids feel watched, and the city's edges feel sharper. We traded danger for distance, but lost something deeper, a raw kind of joy that only came with letting go. You didn't have to go far to know what was happening. On nearly every block, a newsstand stood like a city nerve center. Papers shouted headlines in bold ink: war, protests, sports scores, gossip. The city talked to itself through newsprint, and everyone listened. Vendors knew their regulars. They had your paper ready before you even asked. People read on trains, benches, and diner counters, flipping pages with inky fingers and furrowed brows. It was a ritual that grounded you, tied you to the moment and the place. There was no scrolling, no pings, just the soft crackle of a fresh edition. Competing voices from the New York World Telegram, the Herald Tribune, and the Daily Mirror filled the city with stories before they were curated or filtered. News felt raw, fast, and human. Now, screens have replaced corners, and silence has replaced shouts. The headlines still come, but the city no longer shares them together, one paper at a time. Maybe the most beautiful thing of all was how the city felt like it was truly yours, even if you had nothing. The subway was your limousine, the park bench, your office, the stoop, your living room. New York didn't belong to the wealthy, it belonged to the bold. You could walk into a diner, a bookstore, or a bar and feel like a regular without ever saying a word. That unspoken belonging, that sense that you had a stake in the streets, was everything. You didn't need money to feel rich, just the right corner and a good pair of shoes. It wasn't always safe or easy. It demanded toughness, patience, and thick skin. But for those who stayed, who made a life here, there was no better place to be. The city gave you everything and nothing, and somehow that was enough. That feeling is harder to find now. Rents soared, neighborhoods changed, glass towers replaced grit. The map still says New York, but the feeling? That's what we'll never get back. The New York City of the 1960s was never perfect, but it was alive. It breathed through every stoop conversation, every jazz note, every hot slice, and every shared glance on the subway. What we lost wasn't just buildings or stores, it was a feeling, a rhythm, a kind of magic that can't be rebuilt. We remember not to mourn, but to honor, to carry forward what mattered, what shaped us, and what made this city feel like home for so many. If these stories brought back even a flicker of memory or made you wish you'd walked those streets, subscribe, because we're not done telling the tales that time almost forgot.